Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your morning with us today or afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about a very hot topic for us in our collection of products that Microsoft refers to as Purview. Things like e-discovery and things like record management are really top of mind for a lot of our state and local government customers. Today, specifically, we've identified 5 things that our state and local government customers should really focus on when thinking about records management. So our presenter today is Erica Toelle. She's a Senior Product Marketing Manager specifically for Purview Records Management. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to her. But actually, before I do, what we put in chat today is a bunch of resources that we're going to cover at the end if you have any questions. But we put all the links in the chat, and we will have our team monitoring the chat if you have any questions as well. So without further ado, Erica, turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Barry. I am so excited to be with you all today. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I actually had the opportunity to present a full-day workshop to state and local government records managers last summer as part of the Nagara conference. And it was just so wonderful to learn about everybody's questions and concerns. And then now to have the opportunity to sum up everything with these 5 questions in this 1-hour webinar. So today we're going to go through the top 5 things that state and local government records managers should do to manage records. So we're just going to go right into it, which is I'm going to start with probably the most common question that we hear, which is how do we ensure that we're actually preserving records? Or how do I get started? I'm just not getting traction in my organization. And what do I do? So the problem is when you talk to maybe organizational leaders or IT people, a lot of them don't understand what electronic records management is. They think of records management as what you're seeing here on the screen. Maybe some dusty folders and boxes, like on a shelf in a basement somewhere. A lot of people haven't gotten the chance to evolve their thinking around how much value records management can bring to the overall organization and to achieving your mission as an agency. So how can we change that? So the solution really is to partner with an initiative that already has leadership support and funding. I mean, I think it would be great if we could have records management be the organization's top priority, well-funded. But I don't know about you, I've never really seen that actually happen in the real world. But what I have seen happen multiple times across all sizes of agencies and even in multiple countries is a success when the records managers work with one of these 3 areas or all 3 of them to integrate records management into these programs that already have the support and the funding. So let's go through each one of these a little bit more detail. So first, I think everyone probably knows you're going to need IT's help to implement electronic records management in Microsoft 365. If your agency is already using Microsoft 365, it means they already have some level of funding and staffing to support it. They have to buy the licenses, they have to keep Exchange and email and SharePoint going. Someone's already doing it. However, IT is chronically understaffed and underfunded at the same time. They have way too many project requests, and they just really feel the stress of trying to take on too much. So I'm mentioning that so that we can empathize with them. So it's really important that records managers do their research and come up with a specific plan, strategy, and ask when they go to IT. So instead of saying, hey, we need to do records management, will you help? Going to them and saying, hey, we really thought through how we want to approach records management in our organization. we're asking to put retention policies on email mailboxes or use retention labels with our SharePoint files. Something that's really specific so they already know from your ask kind of what the scope of it is. And then really records management can often make their lives easier. Let's talk specifically about a Microsoft 365 IT admin for a second. They're worried about things like SharePoint site quota. They're worried about, what do I do with all these old teams sitting around? Because the more there is, the more resources it takes to manage it. And so oftentimes by implementing the retention and also deletion side of records management, you're making their lives easier. So then going to security. So security has a lot of attention and funding right now. Everyone's concerned about data breaches, cyber attacks. As an example, last week, my sister, a high school teacher, her whole school district was attacked by a ransomware attack, and they did not have access to any electronic system or internet well, they still don't. We'll see how long it lasts. It's something that's a serious concern. So records management actually fits quite well into the security story. The less files there are, the less will be exposed in a breach. Retention prevents things from being deleted by a cyber attack. And then also, it's just like an easy add-on if they're already using the data protection stuff. And then finally, records managers already know where the highest value, high risk data is, right? Our retention schedule tells us. A lot of times security people are still trying to figure that out. So you can help them with kind of one of their biggest pain points. And then lastly, more up and coming in the US is privacy concerns. More and more states are implementing, especially consumer privacy laws, which a lot of times in government, we're dealing with everyday citizens, which are consumers. And a lot of privacy laws, one of the major components is actually records management 101, right? Properly categorizing the information. So you know what has personally identifiable information, PII, and what doesn't. If people file a request to have their data deleted, and it's a reasonable request according to policy and law, how do you delete it and keep an audit trail of that deletion? These are things we've already figured out in the records management world, so we can be an asset to those teams that are fairly new trying to figure this stuff out. Those are just some ideas. Of course, we could do a whole presentation just on this topic. I do see that we have our first question in the chat. So Sam from the state of Michigan, hey Sam, says, hey, we met at ARMA. Has Microsoft given any more thought to creating a local and state government work group to address concerns with managing records within Microsoft 365? That's a great question. And actually, we have the right team on the call to maybe make that type of a thing happen. If anyone from our Microsoft state and local government group has a thought about that, feel free to come off mute.
So I don't know if this is appropriate, this is Barry, but we have established a community specifically for state and local government customers under to use the word compliance. So perhaps this is an area where we can put the link into that community. Maybe there's something specific that we can address to records management. But we have established that community, so we're glad to share the link as a starting point for you.
Amazing, thanks, Barry. So hope that answers the question. And then for everybody else, go ahead and please put your questions in, and I'll pause during each section to answer for you. Okay, so now let's move on to our next concern, number 4. So a lot of times I hear state and local government records managers saying, of course, we're required to review content before it's disposed to make sure that it is time in fact to delete that, has the right retention category, that isn't something that ultimately was misfiled and needs to be transferred for long-term preservation. Completely reasonable. So how do I do that? Well, the great news is we actually have 2 different options available right now. So the first one is our what we call multi-stage disposition, which is available in the Microsoft Purview compliance portal. And then the next one is our new Power Automate integration for disposition approval. Now, if you're an SLG customer that happens to be in a commercial tenant, you have the Power Automate functionality right now. It's in public preview. If you are in one of the government tenants like GCC, then it'll be available in June for you to use. But at the end, when we share our resource links, we have a link to get a free commercial test tenant. If you want to try it out in the meantime, just to test it and understand how it works, it's going to function exactly the same in the government tenants as it does in commercial. So your learning will be great or will be applicable. So diving into each one of these a little bit, and then of course, we're going to show you the real thing in a demo. The multi-stage disposition allows you to have one approval path per category, meaning this is the first user or group that would approve the item. This is the second one, and we can go up to 5 stages of approval. The approvers will need to have what we call disposition review permission to the Microsoft Purview portal. And then they would be sent a reminder email each week, once a week, saying, hey, you have items to approve. When they click on that link, it's going to bring them to their page in the portal to review and approve those items. Now, the Power Automate option is completely customizable because there's a lot of agencies where I'm sure that very standard approval available in the multi-stage disposition just isn't enough or doesn't meet the requirements for your process. In those cases, the Power Automate integration is a great option. So you can literally make this thing do whatever approval path you want. So as an example, I often see our customers asking that the first stage of approval be the person who created the document or last modified it, or they have a routing table where they have a department name or an agency name or some designation, and then the people who need to approve it within that category. Power Automate can accomplish all those scenarios. The approvers would then visit an app. For those that are technical, it's a Power App to actually do their content review. And then you can always customize any notifications and reminders and emails that are sent. You can even have it send them a message in Teams that they have to approve something, just depending on how your organization likes to communicate. And you can also do cool things like if you want to have a certificate of destruction that has metadata from your SharePoint document libraries included in the certificate of destruction, you can do that. You can have it be, just a list, or you could have it be individual PDFs for each certificate. We have a lot of customization options there. So with that, let's go ahead and do our first demo and show you what these 2 options look like. So first, we'll show you the multi-stage disposition. So for those that haven't seen the Microsoft Purview compliance portal before, this is it. So this is where you can administer all of the compliance functionality. Your IT department will have to give you permission to access this. And then you can also give permission to yourself or other people to just certain solutions in this area. So for example, for records managers, your IT department can give you access to just data lifecycle management and records management, which are the 2 you'll need to use to configure your policies. We're going to go ahead and go into records management, and we're going to go in File Plan and create a new label. So I'm going to just speed through some of these options here. We have resources online if you want to know more about the options and why you would use them. And I'm going to go to this option, which is choosing to start a disposition review. This is where we configure the multi-stage disposition functionality specifically. And when we click Create Stages and Assign Reviewers, this is where we can add the name. So let's just say the first, this is maybe a sales retention label. So the first group that should review this is sales. So I named the stage. Now I'm going to add a group to review it. That way, if an individual leaves the company or changes jobs, we don't have to go in and actually edit the label. We can just add or remove them from this group. Then I'm going to say the second stage needs to be the records management approvers. And it'll progress to this stage after it's been approved from the second stage. I have a group already set up for my records management admins, and I click OK. And now it's configured that when items marked with this label reach the end of its retention period, then it'll kick off this workflow. And let's go ahead and see what that experience looks like. I'm going to click Cancel. And I'm going to click here on Disposition. This is the disposition area where we're going to do all of our reviews. So I just have a label set up here that has items that are, sorry, my cat, pending disposition. And you can see here what those items are. So this is the view that somebody who is a reviewer would see, and they're only going to see the items that are assigned to them at that moment in time. They can select an item, and it'll preview here on the right-hand side so that they can see what they're reviewing, what the content is. And they can also see things like some of the metadata. And then if anyone has approved it before them, they can see that in the history. If they're ready, they can click Approve Disposal, add a comment, and apply that. If you would like to, you can also select multiple items at one time, or all the items in the view. And then you do have some options for filtering things. So for example, you could filter by location and then dispose of everything like as an aggregation from that location. Once the items have been disposed, they're going to go to this disposed items view. Mine has a little bit of a bug. Normally you would see a lot of items here, but I test out all the new features, so I catch the bugs before they get to you, and one of them kind of messed this up yesterday. So a couple things to notice here. This is your proof of destruction. So it's just going to have the file name, the last known location, the comments that were added by the disposition approvers, the names of each person that approved deletion. And then we also have this progress column. So the progress column will show you 3 stages. Number 1, it's been approved for deletion, which will show up pretty quickly after you click that approve button. Number 2, if it's in the SharePoint recycle bin waiting to be deleted, we do allow for a 93-day process just to make sure people didn't do things by accident, so it's still recoverable by support or their admin. And then just so your records managers always know what's going on with their content, it'll say permanently deleted when it is permanently deleted. So that's a quick overview of how multi-stage disposition works. Now let's look at how the new Power Automate option works. So again, I'm just going to go through these same settings super quickly and get to the same screen here. So instead of going through this Start a Disposition Review option, I'm going to choose to run a Power Automate flow. Now, I already have a flow pre-built to do the things that I want to show you. So it's just going to load up here. And you can see I want to add expired items from SharePoint Online to the disposition review list. So I would select that and continue to configure my label as normal. So what this means, we're going to label things with the label. When the item reaches the end of the retention period, it's going to start this flow. So what does this flow do? I meant to have this up, sorry, I accidentally closed this right before. So essentially what this flow is going to do is add things to our disposition review app. This app is 100% customizable. It's going to look a little boring. But that's because okay, great. You always run things right before, and then there's always the demo guides aren't in your favor. So this looks a little, not as pretty as it could. That's because I'm not a designer. But this can be completely customizable how you'd like it to look. So a person assigned an item would come here. They could see metadata from SharePoint that's beyond what was shown in that multi-stage disposition review. You could put whatever filters you want here so they can filter down to really just the items they want to see. You can, decide what actions you want them allowed to take. So a lot of times I hear records managers just want them to have the dispose option. They don't want them to be able to extend retention by a year or change the label. So you could just have them see the dispose option. It also can be only showing them the items that are for the review right now, but then when you log in as a records manager, you could see all the items if you want. So that's just an idea of what's possible. And then to populate this dashboard in the background, we do have these Power Automate flows running to build this. So you can see here, add expired SPO items to the disposition list. So what this does is pull information from SharePoint to populate the metadata. It formats it to appear nicely in that app that you saw. Here's our trigger when an item reaches the end of the retention period. Here it's pulling the information that you need. You can see here, I've set up emails, so it'll let me, the records manager, know if anything goes wrong. And it will send people an email letting them know they have an item to review. You could batch the emails, you could do whatever you would like there. And then the last thing we have to make this work is after someone has taken action in the app, we want to tell the system what action to take. And so what it says is when someone takes an action, look at what action they took. They deleted the item. Then we're going to delete the item compliantly so it appears correctly in the audit log and follows all of our records management principles. Then we're going to update the app saying it was deleted. So that's just a very quick overview of how this works. I will say Power Apps and Power Automate are very standard functionality that a lot of organizations now have people on staff that are just building these types of flows. So it'd be worth it maybe to look in your organization to see if that's a possibility. Now I saw a couple questions come through. Jessica asks, how long is the disposed items viewable? So for the multi-stage disposition option, the disposed items will be available for 7 years. If you use the Power Automate option, that's completely up to you. You could keep them indefinitely if you would like. You could even apply a retention label to the disposed items certificate of destruction to delete it after 25 years, whatever you decide it needs to be. Jessica also asks, I was looking at the Power Automate documentation connected to Purview in Microsoft. It's very short on instructions. Is there another source for how-tos? Jessica, I agree with you, and I am pushing super hard to make our documentation more robust. I really hope we can do that soon because I'm pretty technical and I was having problems following our own directions. That's a problem we need to fix. So I'll let them know, Jessica, that you agree as well. Doug asks about the recording of the session. So I believe Leo is going to respond to that. Thank you. All right.
Yes.
I don't think it. Go ahead.
Yes, you're going to get a copy of the, or you're going to get a link to the recording within 5 days. You get an email.
Perfect. And usually we need the 5 days to do things like add captions and things required for accessibility. All right, let's move on to number 3. So a problem that we often see is records managers saying, hey, people just aren't managing records correctly. We've, clearly defined a process they should follow. They should be putting things in certain places or applying a specific label in policy, but it's just not happening. How can we solve that? So in that case, there's 2 approaches that you can take separately, or they also work really well together. So the first one, of course, is not going to be a surprise to any records managers on this call, which is to automate retention so that the end users don't even know records management is happening, and it happens consistently and accurately in the background. The second option that I'm seeing more and more, especially in the local government space, is integrating records management into business processes. So it's just a normal part of the process, and again, people don't have to worry about it as a separate thing. So looking at these 2 options in more depth, so we have 6 options for automation available, which we'll go over what those are and see a quick demo of some of them. And this is, really where records managers have control about what content is classified and how. Then on the integration into business processes option, this is using things like our Power Automate and Power Apps that you just saw. We're seeing a lot of these local governments take a process and automate it using those tools. Now we have a predictable, repeatable set of inputs and outputs from that process. Well, guess what? A lot of times the output is a record. We can have it categorized correctly and apply the right retention and deletion policies right as part of that process. I'm going to talk to an example of a specific local government and how they did this in just a moment. So these are the 6 options that we have to auto-apply retention. So the first is one that security people will find very exciting. We can scan files and emails to see if they contain sensitive information. So Microsoft has created about 300 patterns of sensitive data. So, a social security number has a very specific pattern, right? 3 numbers, a dash, 2 numbers, a dash, 4 numbers. And then oftentimes around it, we'll have SSN or the pound sign for a number or hashtag, depending on if you're younger than me. And we can look for those patterns and think, yeah, this probably has sensitive information in it. If we find that, we could apply a specific retention label to ensure that content isn't kept for too long or whatever your organization's policy says. The next option is very popular for SharePoint content and OneDrive content especially, and that's you can apply retention based on the metadata on the file. So let's say that you have maybe a procurement contract with a vendor who's going to run a class for your agency. You can say when that contract is finalized, then keep it for 5 years past the contract expiration date, as an example. We have the contract expiration date as metadata. We have that it's final as metadata. And then we can automatically apply the retention label when those 2 things are true. A next option is to use what we call a trainable classifier to categorize the document. So in Microsoft Purview, we have now I believe, about 60 pre-built trainable classifiers to look for common things like HR documents, specific financial documents, resumes that contain PII data, and you can either use one of our pre-built trainable classifiers or make your own, and it'll look for that type of content everywhere in your Microsoft 365 environment. So you don't have to worry about, people putting it in the wrong site. It can find it wherever the content is. When it finds a document that matches that classifier, it can apply a retention label. Another option is to apply a default retention label to a document library or a folder in a document library. When one of those two things happens, then everything in that library or put in that library later would automatically get that retention label. Especially if you have a well-defined place to put things, that could be just an easy step so end users don't have to do anything anymore. Another one that I wish I could go into more in this presentation, but had to make a tough choice because of time, is using Microsoft Syntax. So Microsoft Syntax is a content AI tool Microsoft offers that can look at the contents of a form or a document, and it can, number one, recognize what type of a file it is. You can train the models using a very few number of documents, like in some cases less than 10, to train it what this document should look like. And it can also extract metadata from the document. So in the example of that procurement contract, if the contract expiration date is listed in there, we can find that date and then put it into a SharePoint metadata column and then use that to trigger retention. Or we can simply say, when a SharePoint syntax finds something that matches this model, then apply the retention policy. Again, probably a great topic for a complete presentation. And then lastly, you can use a retention policy to apply retention to everything that's in a SharePoint site, team, or mailbox as well. And then the policy would be applied to everything inside that container. So we had another question, which actually is a really good one. I probably should add a slide at the beginning to answer. And that is, what is Purview? So that's actually a great segue into our next demo, where I can explain what is Purview as the first thing, and then the demo is the second thing. So switching over to that. So Microsoft Purview is the name for our compliance and data protection tools and functionality. It is its own administration area within your Microsoft 365 environment. And we have about 10 different types of solutions related to compliance that you can use. So just as a couple examples, a lot of people, records managers, are also concerned about responding to freedom of information requests. You could use our e-discovery functionality to find content within the scope of that request and export it to fulfill the request. This is also where you can find our audit log, and then other things like what your security team might be looking at, which is data loss prevention policies. So can sensitive information be sent in an email to somebody that has an email account that's not your agency's email? Or information protection. If we find personally identifiable information in a file, should we encrypt it so that you have to have an agency email to view that? Those are just a couple quick examples. There's a whole lot of depth here in this suite, and I believe that this webinar series kind of goes through and highlights a different compliance solution each time. So we'd highly encourage you to attend more of these webinars to learn more. With that, let's go ahead and look at how we can use auto apply to apply some of our retention policies automatically. So pretend that I, already have one of these retention labels set up. Now I want to actually tell it where to apply. That's where I set up my auto apply a label option. So let's go ahead and choose employee records. And then we'll choose auto apply a label. I would put a name for the policy that's meaningful. And then I can choose how I want to auto apply the label. So you can see the different options. So apply content to if it contains sensitive data, if it contains essentially certain metadata, if it matches one of those trainable classifiers. And then we also have an option I didn't go over and include because often it's financial services that cares. But we can also retain the version of a file that's shared as a link in an email or a Teams message for later if you need to know that. Let's just go ahead and look at the sensitive info as an example. So we have these pre-built templates, as I mentioned, that look for patterns of data. So as an example, if I select privacy and then I go and look for maybe US personally identifiable information, it's going to actually look for these 5 patterns of data. So any taxpayer identification number, social security number, passport, full names, addresses. And if it finds that, then it would apply it the retention label employee record. I'm not going to go through all the steps until the end, but that's how that generally works. The next one is auto applying based on metadata. This uses something called keyword query language to define what should be found. So you're essentially creating a search query. Anything that matches that search will you'll apply the label. So there's different ways to set this up using information architecture. Again, that could be a whole presentation in itself on how to do that if people are interested. But we could do things like, say, if the content type is, let's say, a contract, and the piece of metadata, we would put a unique name for that metadata. I'm just simplifying, is, let's say, like a vendor contract, and the status is final. If it meets those 3 criteria, then it would apply a retention label. Now, I would love us to add like a simple condition builder for this. So if that's something you would find useful, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll include in the resources a link to kind of a cheat sheet for how to enter this information that I find really helpful. Oops. So next, let's look at the option to apply retention based on a trainable classifier. You can see these are the pre-built ones that Microsoft has available. You would want to run a test to make sure that our pre-built classifier works in your environment. But these are all the different types of options that are available. And then you could also build your own as well. So let's go ahead and just choose this one so I can show you the remaining steps. You would tell it where to look for this type of data. So in this case, let's go ahead and just choose anywhere we might have files. We already chose a label, but I guess we're choosing it again. Let's just choose that one. And then it would create the policy. These policies can sometimes take up to 7 days to scan everything in your environment and apply the labels appropriately, but sometimes it takes much less time than that. So that's a quick overview of some of the auto apply options available. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so we'll just move on to oh, I forgot I snuck this slide in at the last minute. So our second option that we talked about was the integrate retention into business processes option. So what does that really mean? So this is just an example of something that might happen in your organization. So let's say that you have a contract, and just the nature of the contract is it's going to always have some type of personally identifiable information in it. We send that contract for approval using our Power Automate approval option. And then once it's approved, we have a step now where it automatically applies the retention label. And it's a record label so that we're making the file editable, so no one can change the contract, no one can change the contract's metadata. And then according to our policy, we need to keep it for 7 years and then immediately delete it because it has PII in it. So if you want to sell this to your security people, you can assure them also that because it has a retention label, it can't be changed. So if there was a breach, no one can delete it, no one can encrypt it. And then at the end of the period, it'll either using review or an automated process, delete that contract. So I just wanted to show this example because going back to our first thing, which was make IT's life easier, make the security people's lives easier. This is an example about how security and records management can come together to help everybody out. Let's also look at an example of a local government agency that's really been integrating records management into business processes using Power Automate, Power BI for dashboards, Power Apps to build specific apps for things, where records management's automatically applied in these processes. So you can read the full case study at the link, but this is, a 20,000 person town in Australia called the City of Marion. And they have 2 people on their records management team doing all of this. So just as one example, they had a process where they have community centers that offer classes, and they were having a really tough time understanding, this class is really popular, we should offer more sessions of that. This other class isn't very popular, we should not do it anymore. And so this records management team, who has been really focused on making processes better as an aside, is kind of the carrot to work with records management, actually went in and built a registration process where people could register for the classes on the website. They used a Power BI dashboard to visualize what classes were full, what categories of classes were popular and what wasn't, so they could make better decisions about how to maximize the use of their public spaces and maximize the benefit to the community, which is their mission. And then guess what? Things like the registration form, which contains PII, had the right retention policy applied from the beginning, so it's not kept past what the law allows. And then also can provide some other benefits with lifecycle management. So this is an example where ultimately their goal was records management and managing their information appropriately, but they accomplished that by essentially offering something that was really a benefit of these business teams and also really a benefit invisible to their leadership as having done something really great to serve the mission. It created a lot of positive impact through the records management program. So I just always like to highlight that story as an example of something that's worked really well when you have a super small team in a local government situation. All right, so problem number 2, I need to manage emails. So, email's been around a long time, but it still is can be a problem child for how to manage it sometimes. So what are our options? for that. So really there's three options that I see people using specifically for email retention and deletion. So the first one's simple. Let's just apply the same retention policy to all of our mailboxes. Maybe we keep things for 3 years and then we delete them. No disposition approval is possible using this method, but you could potentially transfer emails outside to your state agency or NARA, whatever's needed, if you need to. For number 2, stealing from federal government, if you want to use a capstone-like approach, that's certainly possible. So capstone applies different retention policies based on the person's role in the organization. So typically, if you're in a leadership role, your content would be retained for a longer period than someone who's in a non-leadership role. So we're going to go over this approach in depth in the next section, spoiler alert, and the number 1 thing. But to summarize it a little bit here, we can look at the user's profile that's in Microsoft 365, and we can tell things like their job title, department, and other things about them. We can use that information to say they belong in a leadership scope or they are not a leader. And then we can say if they're in a leadership scope, then apply the longer retention policy to just those people that are in a leadership role. For everyone else, apply the shorter policy. In this case, depending how you set it up, disposition, review, and approval could be an option, as well as transfer. And then lastly, this is one that works for all customers, including those with E3. You could technically have ask your users to put emails that are records into a specific folder, and then have retention label applied to that email if it's in that folder, therefore applying the right retention category. However, it really relies on the users to follow your instructions for how to set it up and actually do that. There's not a way for an administrator to push that kind of thing out to all users. But I like to mention it as an option because a lot of E3 users don't want to just apply a blanket retention policy to all content in the mailbox. So let's go ahead and look at a demo really quick of number 1 and number 3, because we're going to go into number 2 in the next section. So again, we're going to go here in the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. This time we're going to click into Data Lifecycle Management. And we're going to choose an option for retention policies. So a retention policy applies the same retention settings to everything that's in something like an Exchange mailbox. So I put a fake name in. I'm going to choose the static option. And then I'm just going to choose Exchange mailboxes. In this case, let's just say we want everyone's email to be kept for 5 years, and then we want to delete it. That's it. Now you've accomplished scenario number 1, which is apply retention to everything in the mailbox. Now for option 2, I'm going to go ahead and open my Outlook here. I'm logged in as a fake user. This option, I can ask the user to create a folder underneath their mail. Oh, here it is. I already did it. I created a folder. I started putting stuff in this folder. And then what I did was assign a policy to just this folder by right-clicking. So that's something you'd have to give your users instructions to do, and they can do that. So Ruben asks, how is this different than Laserfish? Our agency is currently using it for records management. In a couple months, we plan on taking our local file share files to the cloud. Is there integration or is Power Automate the way to go? I actually don't know Laserfish that well, so maybe If one of the other team members is able to answer that, you could do that in the chat. I also want to make sure we can get to the last option here since we're at the last 10 minutes. And that is our number one problem, I hear. So a lot of government organizations have multiple agencies using one single Microsoft 365 tenant. And those agencies need to operate independently. How the heck do I do that? So as part of this problem, I'm gonna announce something that we've actually not announced publicly yet. So this is gonna be breaking news. You're hearing it, we're here in this webinar first. So I'm super excited about that. So when you're thinking about this problem, there's really two sides to it. So the first side is you need to be able to designate what content in your Microsoft 365 environment belongs to which agency. So, what teams belong to agency X? What SharePoint sites are theirs? So how do we do that? The second problem is I want, agency X, I want their retention manager or their records manager, sorry, to log into the Purview portal and only see like their retention labels, their retention policies. How do I do that? So the first one around the content we can do today with adaptive scopes. The second one is the breaking news, which is a new feature we're going to be releasing in a month in private preview, first only to commercial tenants, so not to government tenants right away. And that is a new feature called scoped administration. So I'll go through each one of those pretty brief or in a little bit more detail. So first, how do you identify what content belongs to which agency? So let's just use a simple example where we have agency X and we have everybody else. So we want to be able to identify what SharePoint sites, mailboxes, Teams, OneDrives, Yammer groups belong to agency X so that we can apply a different set of retention policies to just them. So how do we do that? Adaptive scopes. So adaptive scopes can be found as a tab in either the data lifecycle management area or the records management area. You can see I have some scopes here already set up, but let's go ahead and create a new scope. I'm going to have it be for users, and we do it based on the attributes in their user profile. So as an example, if we want to find everybody in agency X, we would need to have that populated in the department column, or a lot of people will use like these wildcard custom attributes where you can put anything you want. So you might say custom attribute 5 is where we define what agency they're in, and we fill in what it is. That's it. So that's just a very quick overview how those scopes work. When you're creating one of your policies, you would select that scope. When you're creating it, to have what the policy you're creating only apply to people in that scope. So this is the recipe for how you would do this, like for all types of content. So you would create 3 scopes, one identifying agency X users, one identifying their groups, which is for Yammer and for Teams, and then one identifying their SharePoint sites. And then you would create policies that apply to those locations. Now let's go to the breaking news. So you're hearing it here for the first time. So you won't find anything online about this yet. You're the first people that get to hear about it. And that is a new feature that we're rolling out across Microsoft Purview solutions called scoped administration. So let's say, you have a records manager for agency X, and you want them to only be able to create policies that apply to their users' sites, teams, or groups. You want them to only see their policies. You'll be able to do that in April 2023 in public preview on commercial tenants, probably going to be in the fall for government tenants. In the first release, you'll be able to manage policies, so retention policies, label policies, but then not retention labels yet. We hope to have that coming very soon. You can also use that now today in data loss prevention, which is a different Purview solution as well. They announced that publicly last week. I'm going to go through these slides. You can have the deck if we want to distribute it. It goes into just more of the techie stuff about how we accomplish this. I will say it's a pattern that's used across M365. So your organization, oh, 1 second. Sorry, my device is turned off all of a sudden. It's fixed now. So anyway, this might be something that your organization is already using. You can check with your IT department. So with that, I do, so this is the summary of what we talked about, but I do want to make sure we leave a couple minutes at the end to go over our resources and say thank you and close that out. So I believe, Barry, I'm handing it off to you.
Great, thank you. I'm here. Thanks, everybody. Very nicely done. So, BB, are you online as well?
Yes, Barry.
Great. Would you mind providing these links were shared in the with you already? Each one of these links. Did you want to walk through these resources? Would you mind?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So yeah, we provide a number of resources for records management as well as data lifecycle management. There is a deployment acceleration guide, which will provide you best practices and also guidance on how you can deploy data lifecycle management and records management. There is also a link that leads you to the different webinars that are available for data lifecycle management and records management. Then our marketing team has also published some amazing blog articles, and there are documentation related to records management. There are also some additional videos that you can refer. We also have the roadmap, which is the Microsoft 365 roadmap for upcoming features, as well as features that have already been rolled out to government community cloud, as well as the commercial tenants. And then finally, at the end, you will see a link to the Microsoft 365 Purview trial environment. So with this, you can get started with records management. So this trial link is available, and you can try all the Microsoft 365 Purview compliant solutions within that. It's a 90-day trial, and it's available for 300 users.
Thank you, BB. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll cover this slide. So if some of you, if you are Microsoft Unified Support customers, we have a number of resources here for you. For example, workshops, and these are all specific to records management. We also have a compliance assessment also available through Unified Support, and we can certainly share more information with you on that. And by the way, if you do have questions, would like to set up a meeting or any other request, actually, the last bullet there, you'll see a email alias to Microsoft SLG compliance@microsoft.com. So MSSLG compliance@microsoft.com. And then, as BB mentioned on the previous slide, we do have a trial available for 90 days for records management in our family of Purview products, and there's a link right there. So that's it. Thank you for attending today. If you have any remaining questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
So Jessica says, thanks